The first step taken in achieving excellence at the predominantly black institution was at a groundbreaking ceremony. ASU officials shoveled in a new $3 million theater arts and art department complex. The facility is scheduled to be completed in 1984, and officials say it'll be one of the largest in the state.
Don't take anything for granted.
The second step students can take is to study 7 hours a day, so they'll be able to compete with other students of all academic levels. That was the challenge by ASU graduate Dr. Robert Satcher, the provost and academic dean at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. He also challenged the teachers to excel in the classroom, faculty members to administer to the best of their ability, and trustees and alumni to support the institution. The foundation for achieving excellence has already been laid. Dr. Satcher says the forefathers exemplified a determined spirit to start the university during what he called uncertain times. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News, on the campus of Alabama State University.
When the patch plan came up for Senate committee consideration, there was plenty of speculation that some members would try to substitute it with the original plan offered by a group of black Alabama voters. But there was no such effort. Instead, Senator Michael Figures of Mobile offered a change to the patch plan that would create a black Senate seat in West Montgomery and pit Montgomery's 2 senators, who are white, against each other for the remaining seat. Senator Figures said the change is a political decision aimed at reducing the black opposition to the patch plan. But Senator Larry Dixon of Montgomery vehemently opposed the change, saying it was a vindictive move and a personal attack on him for opposing the black plaintiffs' plan. Senator Dixon argued the patch plan is designed to deal only with those areas listed by the Justice Department, and Montgomery County isn't a part of those areas. Mr. Dixon had been a prime mover of the patch plan, but with the change tacked on, was one of 2 voting unsuccessfully against it. The legislature's attorney, Dave Boyd, was questioned at length about the ramifications of each plan. He essentially told the committee each plan has its drawbacks. The blacks plan would increase this year's re-election chances, and the patch plan increases chances the federal court will object to a state constitutional requirement to preserve county lines. The patch plan now moves on to the Senate calendar, where it will be up for possible final passage next week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
For several weeks, representatives of the governor's office, legislature, business, and labor have been working on a bill to increase jobless benefits. The House Business and Labor Committee met this morning expecting to receive an agreed-upon bill. But the governor's confidential assistant, Farrell Patrick, informed committee members that negotiations weren't complete yet. The committee recessed until later in the day, and the negotiators reportedly returned to their talks in the Industrial Relations Building. Several hours later, the committee reconvened. Mr. Patrick told the committee that a tentative agreement had been reached. The proposed tentative agreement would increase maximum weekly benefits from $90 to $120 after July 1st, and only for workers who lose their jobs on or after that date. Current unemployment checks wouldn't be affected. To pay for the extra benefits and other debts, employees' tax would be increased, and the maximum tax employers pay would also go up. In addition, employers would pay what's being called surcharges that would be effective only when the unemployment trust fund goes below a certain level. The committee didn't get to act on the tentative bill because final agreement hadn't been reached. The committee meets again in the morning. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol. The House Business and Labor Committee met this morning expecting to receive a bill agreed upon by labor, industry, legislators, and the governor that would raise unemployment benefits and help eliminate a debt of the Unemployment Trust Fund. Governor Wallace's confidential assistant, Farrell Patrick, told committee members that the final bill hadn't been worked out yet. The committee recessed for several hours to allow the talks to continue in the State Industrial Relations Office. Later, Mr. Patrick announced to the committee that a tentative agreement had been reached on the legislation. He says the proposed bill maintains the maximum weekly benefit of $120. Other provisions of the bill include increases in the taxable wage base, doubling of the tax employees' pay, an increase in the maximum tax employers' pay, and what's called surcharges on employers. The benefit increase wouldn't be effective until July 1st and only for workers who lose their jobs on or after that date. The committee plans to vote on the bill in the morning. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
The dream of a navigable waterway stretching from Mobile to Gadsden is nearly 100 years old. The idea came from a group of barge operators back in 1890. But it wasn't until 1945 that the U.S. Congress started funding the project.
We cannot stop till the job is completed.
Now, 18 years later, after spending millions of federal dollars for research, the project is stalled, 163 miles short of its goal.
We've been waiting, of course, for the right time for Congress to decide that we could have a new construction start.
Money is needed to start work on locks at 5 dams between Montgomery and Gadsden, and to dredge a channel in the riverbed for barges to pass through.
And we asked last year for $3.5 million, which would have been the first increment toward working on the Water-Bolden Dam. That's the first lock.
I will affirm to you and pledge Governor Wallace's support for the Coosa project.
But association officials say it will take more than promises for the project to be completed. It will take at least 8 years and more than $1 billion. So do you think you'll get funding this year?
Well, you can't say.
Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The need for the historically black colleges and universities. We live in a nation, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to open my remarks. Achieving excellence is an active process. We measure success in higher education by our ability to continue to be successful. Even famous artists and athletes must work hard, consistently practicing in order to continue to excel or in order to continue to be successful.
Put in. The chairman of our art department, I think I saw her.
Susan, we're recording it. Go ahead.
Stand for.
This is the only licensed hazardous waste dumping site in the state. It's located in Sumter County. But for now, the state has no authority to regulate who brings the waste into the state or how the burial is carried out. The federal government or the Environmental Protection Agency has that authority. The EPA has set guidelines for all hazardous waste dumping, but according to state officials, the EPA would like to relinquish that authority to the State Environmental Management Commission. First, however, the state must adopt a set of guidelines for hazardous waste management. They must be almost exactly like federal guidelines or be even stricter. The EMC has been working on a set of regulations and today adopted a revised set that includes requiring hazardous waste treatment operators to provide financial responsibility for any threat to the environment. One proposal that the EMC was looking at requires a 2-week notification of hazardous waste shipments, but that was deleted because of criticism from both environmentalists and the industry. But before the state gets total control, more regulations and legislation will have to be passed. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
I saw a wagon without a driver, a constitution to deal with legislatures. And of course they now, and the last reapportionment came 4,000 people as 5. And they say now that if they don't bring the perfect plan to them by the March the 1st, they're going to have to all run again. And of course that's another one of the aggravations we find in this matter, which even Berger says the courts have gone too far and invited too much litigation. But be that as it may, they must do so and do so by March the 1st. In my judgment, they will have to run again.
As well as the
Senator Heflin, truckers, and small businessmen came together in a hastily called meeting early this evening. The group drove down from North Alabama to ask the senator if he'd fight for reductions in highway user fees and gas taxes.
All they want to do is run their small businesses, run their trucks down the road, pay their bills, pay their taxes, but not taxes that put them out of business.
Senator Heflin says he sympathizes with the truckers' problems. He voted against the increases.
And it's forcing a portion of the industry to bear a larger percentage of the tax burdens of the government.
But he also says the strike has gone on long enough. He thinks the truckers were right to call attention to an unfair situation, but the strike, especially the violence, has gotten out of hand.
I really believe that every act of violence has sort of dug deeper the grave of your cause.
Senator Heflin says he'll take up the truckers' cause on the floor of the U.S. Senate when he gets back to Washington next week. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
All right. Well, thank you. Nice to see everybody. All right.
The fellow there helped him find a piece of land where he had some cattle. He and his wife lived out at the edge.
How much will it take to finish the project, and how long will it take to finish the project if you were to get an immediate start?
Well, if we got an immediate start, about 8 years to complete the project to Gadsden. The cost in 1981 dollars is about $1.1 billion. There's been some slight inflation since then, but that's approximately what it will be. That's a large amount, but the benefits that come from it exceed that by a considerable amount, and this is very definitely a worthwhile investment on the part of the government.
And
well, actually, it was a fraud case started back in 1978. The bank had put an insider into a local company and then later foreclosed, promised loans and didn't come through, and later foreclosed on the business and sold it to the person who they put in the business. And the end result was that the owners lost it completely, and it cut off all of the creditors of the company except the bank.
Of the 5 known signees in the area today, 3 were from Lanier. This is Big Steve Wilson, one of the state's top line prospects, inking with Pat Dye's Auburn Tigers this morning. Other poet signees today were punter Billy Knighton going to Southern Mississippi and lineman Leon Williams, a 6'2", 190-pounder who signed with Tennessee State. Wilson at 6'4", 275 was an all-state performer with the Poets despite several injuries that slowed his high school career. He says those injuries are behind him as he looks to his playing days at Auburn.
Any concern about your shoulder, which you had operated on, Steve?
No, sir. Dr. Houston said it was fine, and he's already gave me some exercises to do with it and everything, and just gotten the movement back in it. But I'm going to have to start lifting with it and get it ready.
Knighton in 3 years averaged over 42 yards a kick to become one of the nation's best. He'll enroll at Southern Miss, a school that produced one of the greatest punters of all time, Ray Guy.
It's going to be a hard job, but I'm just going to go in there and try to do the best thing, best job I can do and try to help him out as much as I can. I don't know if I can follow in his footsteps, but, I'm going to give my best shot.
New Alabama coach Ray Perkins signed 2 area players today. Stanhope Elmore running back Andrew Gilder was inked at this ceremony in Prattville this afternoon. Jeff Davis defensive back Marvin Humphrey signed with the Tide in a private ceremony this morning. Gilder was one of the South's best running back prospects and narrowed his choice to Alabama and Tennessee. But in the end, he knew Bama was where he wanted to go.
Why did you choose Alabama?
Well, because of long football tradition, I also like Coach Perkins. And I always dreamed of playing football for the University of Alabama.
So 5 area players signed today. More are expected to land scholarship offers as the recruiting wars continue. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Good evening, I'm Bob Howell, and this is the news for the 9th of February. Today, the independent truckers came to town to talk with U.S. Senator Howell Heflin. A small group of disgruntled truckers arrived late this afternoon for their conference with the senator, reportedly to talk about their dislike for increased gas and road use taxes. Susan Silvernail of our staff is at the senator's office for this live report on what happened. Susan?
All right, Senator Heflin, this group of independent truckers and businessmen have asked you to help them repeal this 5 cent a gallon fuel tax increase. Will you do this for them?
Well, I told this group that I had been opposed to the user's fee, which is a 900%. It's not a gasoline tax, but it's that they are opposing so much. It's a user fee on trucks, which is a 900% increase. I called on them to end their strike, and I called on them to end any violence. Every time an act of violence occurs, they dig the grave of that cause even deeper. I have been opposed to these user fee taxes all along, spoke against it, offered an alternative, and will continue to try to give them relief. I think they are due it anytime you have a 900%. But I think that they ought to stop their strike, or shut down as they call it, and certainly violence ought to end.
Okay, thank you, Senator Heflin. We have Senator Heflin here taking a very hard line on violence. We are back to you, Bob.
Thanks very much, Susan. We'll have more on that, a complete report tonight at 10 o'clock. In the meanwhile...
Senators postponed the upper chamber's version of the reapportionment plan and chose to wait on the House version that'll be ready for debate next Wednesday. The Senate adopted a special order calendar. The first bill passed was one that makes the theft of fish from fish farms a crime. The bill's sponsor, Senator Ed Robertson of Northport, says some catfish farmers are having valuable breeding stock stolen. The senators also approved a bill that would establish a panel to review vote tabulation methods and equipment to be used by cities and counties for elections. The House spent its time dealing with minor legislation. House members were briefly caught in a Jefferson County squabble over a bill that would allow Birmingham to regulate Sunday liquor sales. When it came time to take up a controversial bill forcing school boards to manage education employee payroll deductions, the House narrowly voted to adjourn, postponing debate on that bill until next week. The bill is sponsored by the Alabama Education Association as a means of deducting individual retirement account contributions and other voluntary contributions. Opponents claim the voluntary contribution is translated into political contributions for the AEA. Earlier, the House Ways and Means Committee postponed action on a bill that would strip the University of South Alabama of nearly 8,000 acres of Mobile Bay. Representative John Casey contends the land is in state-owned territory and can't belong to anyone else. The university claims the land was lawfully deeded to them. The land happens to be adjacent to offshore tracts that attracted more than $400 million for oil exploration rights. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The House narrowly voted to adjourn as a controversial education employee payroll deduction bill was about to come up for debate. Opponents to the bill warned the other members that if they voted to stay and debate the bill, it would be a vote to stay for a long and heated debate. Earlier, the House passed a number of non-controversial bills. The Senate also chose to avoid controversy as the members voted not to consider the Senate's version of the legislative reapportionment plan. Instead, the senators will wait until next week when the House version of the bill will be in line for possible final passage. The Senate's time was taken up with a number of non-controversial measures, including a bill that would make it a crime to steal fish from a fish farm. Earlier in the day, the House Ways and Means Committee delayed a vote on a bill stripping more than 7,000 acres of offshore land from the University of Alabama and returning it to the state. The territory's ownership is in question since the bill's sponsor contends only the state can own navigable offshore lands, while the university contends it used to be a dry land mass that legally has been deeded to them. The land happens to be adjacent to offshore tracts oil companies have bid more than $440 million for oil exploration rights. Meanwhile, a compromise unemployment compensation benefit bill moved out of a House committee. It won't be up for debate until next week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Final passage of the bill. Clerk call next bill on special order. On page 4 of the calendar, Senate bill.
Since the end of World War II, crime prevention has been the national project of the Exchange Club. Over the years, the Montgomery Group has supported several law enforcement projects aimed at reducing crime in the city. Attorney Bill Gobrecht says he feels the group's support of the police department's crime prevention unit has led in part to a 14% reduction in property crimes in the city. Featured speaker at today's awards meeting, State Supreme Court Chief Justice C.C. Beau Torbert says, in the 1830s, a Frenchman, Alex de Tocqueville, described American citizens as being very involved in the law enforcement system. Justice Torbert says the city of Montgomery has made great strides in reducing crime, but he says news accounts of serious crimes point out a lot more needs to be done.
And so while we can point to having made progress, we have not succeeded in bringing our country, and this part of our country that we're all proud of, back to the sort of sanity that Alex de Tocqueville spoke about in the 1830s.
The four lawmen nominated for Law Enforcement Officer of the Year were Corporal Edward Polk, a detective with the Montgomery Police Department, Lieutenant Frank Mitchell, a firearms expert with the Montgomery Police Academy, Corporal Joe Rowe, who's in charge of the downtown traffic units, and Deputy Sheriff Robert Stone, assigned to the Raymer Division of the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Stone was awarded the Law Enforcement Officer of the Year for his work in solving several burglary cases, his off-duty apprehension of a murder suspect, and several humanitarian acts while on duty. Deputy Stone is the first person from the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department to receive the award. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
One thing the board did agree on is that the Tyson resolution is a safeguard to make sure Alabama colleges and universities maintain quality teacher education programs. Under the proposal, results from the certification exam will serve as an indicator to see which programs are weak and need strengthening. The original resolution called for a 70% student passage rate on the exam, but now 60% of the students must pass the test. That after black school officials and board member John Tyson earlier reached a compromise. Tyson settled for 60%, while the black officials wanted 50%.
In order to allay everybody's fears in that regard, then what we would do would be to compromise. Instead of 50 or 70, put it at 60%. Now, that is a compromise. I still would personally prefer 70%, but I thought that we could do more towards promoting understanding of the program and increasing the likelihood that it would be a success if we had more people on with us.
But not all board members liked the compromise. Isabel Thomason suggested to move back to the original 70% passage rate, saying anything less would weaken the resolution. And one school official from the University of Alabama felt 80% is reasonable. The board members say the idea is to improve as many teacher education programs that are targeted as needing assistance.
I'm not prepared at this point, and the reason the resolution is the way it's drafted is that I'm not prepared to say that a test score indicates that the program is necessarily defective. All we're doing is we're saying that there's a possibility and we need to examine it and find out.
The Tyson resolution goes into effect September of this year. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the State Board of Education. The Tyson resolution goes into effect September of this year, following the December, March, and June results of the teacher certification exam. Now, schools where teacher education programs are targeted as needing improvement have 4 years to meet standards or face possible elimination. During the 4-year interim, a tentative list of those programs targeted as weak will be presented to the schools. That list will not be published. Board members don't want the schools to receive adverse publicity. If the programs aren't improved during the first 2 years, a review team will be sent in to take a look at the problem. Now, the student passage rate is 60% instead of 70%. A compromise was reached between black school officials and board member John Tyson.
In order to allay everybody's fears in that regard, then what we would do would be to compromise. Instead of 50 or 70, put it at 60%. Now, that is a compromise. I still would personally prefer 70%, but I thought that we could do more towards promoting understanding of the program and increasing the likelihood that it would be a success if we had more people on with us.
Tyson says the primary objective of the resolution is to maintain quality teacher education programs.
Right now, the test is doing a very effective job of keeping those people out of the classrooms. They are not allowed to be teachers right now, and we're going to take, with this resolution, the next step and address the quality of the education program where that person came from.
The resolution is expected to set a precedent for education programs at Alabama colleges and universities. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the State Board of Education.
We can begin to improve those, and then
4 outstanding lawmen from the City Police Department and the County Sheriff's Department were nominated for Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. The nominees included Detective Corporal Ed Polk, who broke up several auto theft rings, recovering over $1 million worth of stolen property. Lieutenant Frank Mitchell, who's in charge of the Montgomery Police Department's firearm training at the Police Academy. Downtown Traffic Supervisor Corporal Joel Rowe, who's in charge of making sure daily and parade traffic moves smoothly and safely. And Deputy Sheriff Robert Stone, who cracked several large burglary cases for the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. While Justice Torbett had praise for the work of lawmen in the field, he also had good words for the people who work at the Montgomery County Courthouse.
When a person charged with a crime goes to trial, the likelihood of success from the standpoint of prosecution is upwards to 90%. And when that same case is appealed to the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals, the chances of that conviction being affirmed or upheld is about 90%. and that is the chances of a reversal for the past 5 years is only 9.9%. And I know that law enforcement has been upgraded, and I'm very proud to at least work in the city of Montgomery, in Montgomery County, because I see it firsthand.
Members of the Exchange Club chose Deputy Sheriff Robert Stone as the Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. Besides breaking several major burglary cases, Deputy Stone, while off duty, apprehended a murder suspect and is credited with saving the lives of several victims of auto accidents. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
I feel like Parkhurst and his Independent Trucker Association kind of sold everybody out. I really do.
Connie Baker and her husband Bobby are from Winfield, Alabama. They're partners in the trucking business and the shutdown. Right now they're questioning what independent truckers really got out of the strike.
Well, we wrote the president, we wrote our senators, congressmen from Alabama here. We come down and talk to Governor Wallace, and well, I think for do any good, people are just going to have to write their politicians and let them know if they don't change things, start working for the people instead of for themselves, they're going to be out of a job next election.
I believe there are a lot of congressmen looking at the problems. What we need now is for someone to do something about it, because in all honesty, if the higher taxes aren't lifted, even though they are several years away, if they're not lifted, there isn't going to be any more independent truckers.
Several truckers told us tonight the strike came at the wrong time and was mishandled by ITA leadership.
And I'm kind of glad of what they did. You know, they called it off. It's probably going to have a lot better effect on the independents right now, and then in the long run, we'll see what happens with the legislature.
At least 300 truckers from West Alabama have voted to go back to work. The president of the West Alabama ITA says truckers got their point across, and they'd only hurt themselves if they stayed off the road any longer. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
You don't tug on Superman's cape. You don't spit into the wind. You don't pull the mask off the old Lone Ranger. And you don't mess around with Andre. Andre, a giant of a man, 7'4", 480 pounds, a wrestler. I guess finding doorways that you can get through, beds that are long enough. Do you have any of these kind of problems?
So that's a problem because it's nothing built for a giant. Even now with this new car they build, they're all too small. When I go to a hotel, I have to check in the hotel where they got a big king-size bed. And the plane, I have to try in first class and take 2 seats sometimes. But I still have a good time. And I love wrestling, I love traveling the way I'm doing.
He can't walk through an airport or a TV station without attracting attention and autograph seekers. Do you think you are number one?
That's really fancy.
He's from France, and he's been taking on challengers in the ring for 19 years.
When I used to go to the gym with the boxers and with the rugby player, all the wrestlers used to be in there, and I would just go in the ring to try to wrestle with them and show me some move. And one day one of the rugby men got hurt and they asked me to take his place. And since that, I'm still wrestling.
Been wrestling ever since.
Yeah.
But he's moonlighted as a TV star, playing roles like Bigfoot. We do want to just let everybody know how tall Andre really is. I'm 5'8". And how tall are you again?
7'4".
He's 7'4". Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Well, there's not that many players. It's really mainly a different type quarterback more than anything else. You're going to try to get a few guys, a few more receivers, because with the wishbone, you've got one receiver, basically. I think we only have 3 receivers on scholarship, actually, prior to this recruiting season. So it's a matter of a different type quarterback when you're going to throw the football more. We've signed 2 or 3 wishbone type quarterbacks, but they will probably wind up playing a defensive back or a wide receiver. They're good athletes, not just the quarterback type, but the other people, with the exception of the quarterback, the different type quarterback, he's recruiting athletes.
Yes, sir, I am. I'm really excited about it. Hopefully I'll
I'll be drafted in the first five rounds, you know, a lot of scouts have said, but I really don't know until that time comes.
Any indication of who might draft you?
No, sir, I haven't had any indications of who will draft me. Seems like all the teams are, you know, they throw a hint that, you know, they're interested in drafting you, but I really don't know until that time comes.
Do you have any preferences of where you want to go?
Not a specific team, but I would like to stay in the warm climate area if that's possible.
Have you considered the USFL at all?
No, I haven't. They drafted me in territorial rights, and they didn't negotiate or attempt to negotiate with me, and I wasn't too much interested in negotiating with them.
North Carolina in white. Jim Braddock with the ball at the top of the key spots Sam Perkins for an easy lob. It was a seesaw game. Othell Wilson, for example, here with a shot, but he misses. Ralph Sampson with the offensive jam, and easy two for Sampson, who had 15 tonight. North Carolina fell asleep at the wheel on this inbounds. Stokes to Kent Edlin, and everyone said, hey, what happened? North Carolina was asleep. Meanwhile, Matt Doherty with a nice drive here, but he misses. Michael Jordan will come up with a big offensive rebound. But there's the awesome 7'4" senior Ralph Sampson. He clears the shot away. It was 31-28 Virginia at the half, and they were hot at the start of the second half. Virginia hit the first 11 points. Othell Wilson with a three-pointer. Ralph Sampson, his usual great game. Although he misses here, he battles for his own rebound and scores two as Virginia led 51-38. Now late in the game, Virginia leads 63-60. Braddock with a miss, Michael Jordan with a rebound. It was 63-62. 52 seconds to go. Virginia leads by one. Jordan with a steal. He'll go all the way and score at 64-63 North Carolina. 6 seconds to go. North Carolina leads by one. Virginia's Ricky Carlisle will get the shot from the key. The shot is up. No good. North Carolina's Jordan rebounds, and North Carolina knocks off Virginia 64-63. I'm George Michael for NBC News.
Well, I'm thinking about maybe walking on someplace in football. I don't know right now about baseball. We'll have to wait and see what kind of year I have this year. I talked to a coach today about possibly walking on, so, you know, I've got a couple nibbles, but nothing big.
Are you disappointed that there weren't more recruiters around looking at your talents?
Well, I guess I'm disappointed, but I'm not. I didn't really expect it. You know, not many guys 5'7" playing quarterback are going to get recruited by a college, so I sort of expected that.
We walked some tricky road together.
Ball game, but it looks like that we're probably seeing a cross section of the people.
May watches. Track is important. More important.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Commander Carter, Chaplain Corps.
President John Kennedy said that the life of the arts is a test of the quality of a nation's civilization. State art officials agree with Mr. Kennedy. In Alabama, children are being exposed to art at an early age. They, like professional artists, are taught to observe from the world around them and create from what they see. They're learning and expressing themselves in a variety of art forms, from paintings done by fourth graders at Greene County schools to Shakespearean masks made of papier-mâché by students in Mobile. Art has other forms too. But what is art.
Art is that thing that is often considered unessential in our lives that I think really makes the difference in whether we have a rich life or not.
I think art is creativity. It's an individual's creativity, how they look at things, how they feel about things, and it comes out, their image of things.
Really just everyday living. It's the way you express yourself.
Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The University of South Alabama Medical Center has the only fully equipped emergency room, called a trauma center, in the Mobile area. Beginning this weekend, the trauma center will be shut down from Friday night until Monday morning. Administrators say the hospital is losing $11 million a year because it has to treat 90% of patients in the area who cannot pay for medical care.
In order to stem the flow of patients who cannot pay, indigent patients, then you must, in fact, stop their access to the care.
This is Mardi Gras time in Mobile, and accidents can happen. Because of that, 5 private hospitals in the city have agreed to treat emergency patients this weekend, even if they cannot afford to pay. But they are not happy about it. They have called for an independent audit of the medical center's books and say it is irresponsible to shut down the trauma center.
Yes, they are the trauma center. Yes, they are getting tax monies, which none of the other hospitals are getting.
55-year-old Dorothy Hudson was treated in the trauma center for a stroke after she lost her job in medical benefits. Now she's concerned what will happen to her if another emergency arises.
So there's a lot of us that'll be concerned because we're without jobs, and at our age, well, who did we have that we can depend on?
Because private hospitals have agreed to provide emergency room service and, if necessary, to admit indigent patients this weekend. The threat of a medical emergency here has eased somewhat, but it has not gone away.
Well, I look forward to getting in a room with the coaches and talking some football now. You know, we're going to spend the next couple of weeks out spring recruiting with the staff, and then as soon as they get back from that, we will sit down as a staff because there are going to be certain changes, certain terminology, things from a communication standpoint, defensively and offensively on the field in practice to get things accomplished. So I'm going to be very eager to get seated in a room with the offensive staff and defensive staff, and then as a staff in general, because we've got quite a few things to iron out.
Are you anxious to get on the field?
Yes, I am. March the 21st, I'll be there, and I'll be, I'm sure I'll be very excited that day.
Auburn has had a week off to prepare for Kentucky. Coach Sonny Smith is hoping the momentum of this win over Florida at home last Saturday will give the Tigers the edge they need against the visiting Wildcats. It's also been 10 years since Auburn has been in the thick of the SEC race this late in the season, and there's no denying that a win over Kentucky is important if the Tigers hope to entertain chances for a championship. Smith doesn't like to look at it as a must game, but
it's a game that we need to win badly because it's a home game and because it's the next game. But it's a game, should we not win, I don't think we'd be out of the race. But still, you don't want to talk in negatives. You want to talk in terms of positives, and in that aspect, it does make it a must game for you.
In their first meeting last month, Auburn was able to beat Kentucky in Lexington for the first time ever. Wildcat coach Joe B. Hall called that one of the most embarrassing losses in Kentucky history. And Smith knows that Hall wants to return the favor on the Tigers' home court.
Well, that was a great win for the program. It has done a great deal for us. And I'm sure that it's on their mind. And I'm sure the fact that they haven't been playing well on the road on their mind, and they want to improve that. And they know that they're capable of beating us. But in another sense, I think now they're more aware of the fact that we could beat them.
A sellout crowd will jam Memorial Coliseum for the 1:30 tip-off of Auburn and Kentucky tomorrow afternoon. TV 12 Sports will be on hand to bring you the game story.
Controlled chaos seems as much a part of boxing as a speed bag and a jump rope. So it should come as no surprise that over 200 people were allowed to squeeze into a tiny function room in the Worcester Centrum for the official weigh-in of tonight's Hagler-Simpson middleweight championship bout. Still photographers crushed the stage as the principals stepped on the scales.
58 and a quarter.
158 and 1/4 pounds.
160 pounds on the button.
I think they were both great. They both looked in good shape to me. Hagler must be in terrific shape at 158 and 1/4. Simpson, he must started to make some weight, so he must maybe he had to work for the weight. You know.
After the weigh-in, Hagler and Simpson met eyeball to eyeball, where the champion gave the English invader a personal message. Simpson, red-faced, seemed embarrassed by the attempted intimidation.
Hagler always does that with that mean look in his face. You know, he shaves his head on purpose. But I don't think that's enough to intimidate Simpson.
For Hagler, tonight's defense will be his 6th. For Simpson, his first crack at a championship belt.
How do you land a slew of striped bass like this? Well, you do like professional John Powell. You fish the right spot, and you use the right kind of bait.
I've been up there now 2 months fishing with a crappie jig and live bait, doing some deep research, so to speak, and catching stripers, hybrids, and crappie, and white spawners up to 40 feet deep. Some of these came from 40 feet, and some of them came from 30 feet.
Some of them are pretty big, especially that one you're fixing to hold up there.
So, yeah, some of them are pretty big.
How big is that one?
That one is about 20 pounds, a little better, and some of the rest of them are about 4 to 8 pounds. But that was the biggest one of the day. And, you know, we caught these 6, which is the limit of this particular species, and 50 crappie all in a little more than an hour.
Powell caught the fish between 11 a.m. and 12 noon Thursday on Lake Martin. Now I know what you're thinking. How was Phil's fishing forecast Thursday at noon? Well, to be honest with you, it wasn't too good. But before you lose faith, listen to this.
Of course, these are deep, and I kid Phil about his forecasts is only for shallow water fishing that are feeding. These, I use my scope, and I go right to their home. In other words, I go find them with my depth finder and go right down to them.
So you're a perfect testimony to say that fishing is good this time of the year, then, right?
It is fishing. You know, the fishing is always good when humans can't take the weather.
Opportunity has been known to knock at the most unlikely of times, the most improbable of places. For Leon Hadley of Montgomery, it knocked on a bitter cold day in 1958. He and a business associate, Bob Warren, were stranded on an icebound highway near Galena, Illinois. As they waited for the road to be cleared, one of them, and they still argue over who brought it up first, one of them mentioned reading a story in Reader's Digest about a hamburger chain launched by a man named Ray Kroc. By the time the road was open for traffic, the two men had made up their minds. They were going to resign their executive-level positions with Burgess Battery Company and start selling hamburgers. Today, Leon Hadley is one of the largest McDonald's franchisees in the nation. Those all-beef patties served with special sauce, lettuce, cheese, and onions on a sesame seed bun have made him a very wealthy man. As far as Hadley is concerned, those golden arches really are gold. The first franchise the two men secured was in Michigan, but in 1967, Hadley acquired an existing franchise on Fairview Avenue in Montgomery. He moved to Montgomery, it was love at first sight, and Hadley is here to stay. Once he invaded Dixie, Hadley expanded in all directions. At one time, he had 36 McDonald's in Alabama, Florida, and Arkansas, plus the 7 he and Warren had in Michigan. He subsequently sold his Florida outlets, but he still has 17 McDonald's in Alabama, 11 in Arkansas, 7 in Michigan. It is a very big operation. Hadley has some 1,800 employees, and each day they fry more than 10,000 pounds of potatoes and grill literally tons of ground beef. There was nothing in Hadley's background to suggest he would become one of the nation's foremost hamburger entrepreneurs. He was born 50 years ago in Iowa, and his degree from the University of Northern Iowa was in physics. At one time, he was a high school physics teacher and football coach. Not anymore. Hadley has branched out in recent years. He owns and operates an 860-acre farm in South Montgomery County, and he is also heavily involved in land development and condominiums on the Gulf Coast. But at heart, he is still a Big Mac man, and he still knows how to fry those fries and grill those burgers. And he still figures that you deserve a break today, and he'll do it all for you. Leon Hadley, a very interesting person.
A lot of people have been attracted to Pritchard this weekend to celebrate the Africatown Folk Festival. Among them is the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors. In addition to having a good time, the mayors will also talk business during their annual convention. And they've got a lot to talk about. At the top of the list is unemployment, which is generally higher in black communities. Of course, white mayors must deal with high unemployment too. But black mayors are generally at more of a disadvantage because many lack political experience and the resources to solve problems. That, according to Johnny Ford, the president of the Black Mayors Conference. Ford believes it's a handicap that can be overcome, and Alabama, with its 24 black mayors, the highest number of any state in the nation, can lead the way.
It gives us an opportunity to meet firsthand with top decision makers from state government and from the federal government. Those decision makers who make decisions about resources which affect our cities and our towns.
What the cities need are jobs, and the mayors are looking to business, industry, and government for help in getting them. Alabama's black mayors are optimistic about the Wallace administration, and the governor's press secretary says Wallace is behind Alabama's black mayors. But as Billy Joe Camp indicated, it's going to be a tough period for everyone. The convention will continue through Sunday.
I don't see any inconsistencies in the total development of America. I think it's no less, divorce from Ronald Reagan becoming president or before him Jimmy Carter. I think it's a progression of American politics.
Progression towards what point?
Allah knows best in terms of what point, but I think the consistency is there in terms of that these people, that's a certain kind of person, like who appeals to the constituents that are the ethics and the morals that make up America.
From Hubert Gerald Brown to Rap Brown, his old street name, to Jamil Al-Amin, this man has seen a lot of changes. During the late 60s, he made the FBI's most wanted list. The government accused him of inciting a riot, then later recanted. Today, he's the spiritual leader of a Muslim community in Atlanta.
I begin with the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. I was invited down by the Muslim community of Tuskegee to participate in a program that deals with the contribution of African Americans to the Islamic cause, to the Islamic struggle. I don't think that one can be divorced from the other. And I think historically, when the truth is told about Muslims or Islam, we'll find out that the background of the history of many Africans who were brought into this country was of an Islamic nature or Islamic development in the continent, on the continent of Africa.
At one time, Al-Amin was a civil rights organizer in Alabama, working against Lurleen Wallace's election. Now he says he's not surprised by George Wallace's return to power, nor by his black following.
Well, I think peoplehood is determined by belief more so than it is by color. And I think what you saw was an example of people who believed in America. And as a result of that belief in America, again, the ethics and the morals of these people were cut across the racial lines, which is similar to the 60s, in which the few people or the few African Americans who voted during that time would also elect, candidates who might not or may not or did not represent them.
Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
The arts, from sculpting and painting to dancing and acting, are like so many other concerns caught up in the search for money. And whereas in the past many artists turned to the federal government for help, now the government is trying to generate more support for art at a local level. The chairman for the National Endowment for the Arts is Francis Hodsall.
If you look at the pattern of art support in this country, the vast majority of it is local. Arts are not created at the national level and distributed. Each community has its own theater or orchestra or whatever it may be. And basically the local citizenry decide what it is they want to support.
So the federal government is now directing some of its financial aid at helping local groups help artists.
What we are trying to do at the National Endowment is to provide seed money to assist those local communities to make judgments as to what kinds of arts presence they wish to have in their communities, and then to hopefully stimulate additional both public, local and private local support for the arts.
State government is also pushing for local art support.
No matter how large the community is or how small the community is, support of the arts in that community is very important.
One thing many say may help bring local support is more local recognition of the efforts of artists. Today, Montgomery businessman Red Blunt was honored for his efforts in supporting the arts, and other Alabamians are being honored tonight with the Governor's Arts Awards. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The works of several artists are on display here through the month of February. One of those artists is Bill Weldon of Montgomery. Weldon's work is a mixture of realism and expressionism. Greenhouse Gallery co-owner Duval Fisher says of Weldon,
as an artist, I find him to be extremely intense, dedicated to his work. I see him more as a social or societal portraitist instead of a personal portraiteur. He gives us attitudes, he gives us perspective on our times. The Window People, the piece he discussed. I see it more as a portrait of the 80s and not necessarily as just two individual people. Bill's dedicated to his work, and it's evident. It's fine art, not just decoration.
Well, the 29-year-old art graduate of Florida State University describes his work and the materials and ideas that go into creating the work.
It's acrylic. I use a lot of airbrush and acrylic washes and things along that sort.
Okay, now the woman bathing, what was your inspiration for that?
The painting started off as predominantly just a black and white painting, and as I got into it, it developed into more of just a colorist type painting.
What about the biker?
The biker's the same way. I'll start off with an idea, and as the painting starts to progress, it develops. It develops itself. They start to paint themselves. Things come forward, new problems crop up, and you deal with them.
Bill Weldon says he's painted since age 6 and likes to think of himself as
interesting
a painter
painting.
of
A lot of
realism,
people ask.
but he admits sometimes expressionism creeps into his work. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News reporter.
Georgia had Alabama down in the early going behind 68% first-half shooting. Gerald Crosby with 11 points in the half put the Bulldogs up by 8 when he bagged that 20-footer. Here's the Birmingham native again with the long bomb. He led the Dogs with a game-high 19. They ran their lead to as much as 13 before intermission when Richard Corrin scored here off the baseline layup. The Crimson Tide did move back to within 7 before half. Enos Watley led the charge. He scores here, tapping in his own missed shot, but Georgia would take a 40-31 lead into the locker room. Then Alabama came roaring out to start the second half. They outscored the Bulldogs 16-6 to take their first lead at 47-46 when Cliff Wyndham hits this follow-up hook. They padded that lead to as much as 7 when Watley comes up with a steal here and goes the distance for the easy layup. Watley led Bama with 18. But the Dogs didn't die. They fought back to tie it. When Lamar Hurd gets the steal, he dishes off to Crosby for the slam that night of the game at 56. Then when Bobby Lee Hurt turns the offensive rebound into a bucket here, the Tide was on their way to the win. Hurt backed Watley with 15. Buck Johnson with 14 padded that lead to 6 as he scores here on the foul line jumper. Georgia again battled back to make it tight, but Watley's 2 free throws with 7 seconds left sealed the 73-71 win.